Picture, if you will, a scene that would have been unimaginable in the ancient world. A Roman emperor in his purple toga, this near-omnipotent god within the borders of the world's mightiest empire, finds himself in the humiliating position of being commanded to get down on all fours. A bearded Persian king, reeking of spices and eastern treachery, casually places his foot on the emperor's trembling back as he mounts his horse like a common mounting block. No, this isn't the twisted fantasy of some sadistic screenwriter. This was the real fate of Valerian, the only Roman emperor ever captured alive and subjected to unthinkable humiliations for his status. But this isn't even the worst part. The most horrifying came after his death, when they flayed the skin from his body, stuffed it with straw, and displayed it in a temple as a trophy for centuries, like some exotic beast. How did this happen? What led to such an ending? Was Valerian simply naive and foolish? Was he just unlucky? Or was he betrayed? Let's find out. Chapter 2: The World Turned Upside Down. The year 260 CE. Something unthinkable is happening in Rome, something that cannot even be contemplated, let alone spoken aloud. The divine Augustus, ruler of the world, father of the fatherland Publius Licinius Valerian, has been captured by barbarians, alive. This isn't just a defeat, it's the collapse of the very idea of Roman supremacy, the end of the world as any Roman understood it. How did a man who at 60, an age when others dream of peace among vineyards, voluntarily took upon himself the burden of a crumbling empire, a man his contemporaries called the embodiment of ancient Roman virtues, become a living symbol of Rome's humiliation? This isn't just a story about military defeat. This is a tragedy about how noble intentions and old-fashioned honor can become a deadly trap in a world where the rules of the game have changed forever. Chapter 3: The Last Roman of the Old School. To understand the scale of this tragedy, let's first meet our protagonist, who was Publius Licinius Valerian before he became the emperor prisoner. Imagine Rome in 253 CE. This is no longer the magnificent Rome of Augustus or Trajan. The empire is cracking at the seams. In the last 20 years, more than a dozen emperors have come and gone. Barbarians are breaking through the borders from all sides. Plague is mowing down entire provinces, and soldiers are selling the purple to the highest bidder. And when young, ambitious generals from the provinces are cutting each other to pieces for power, onto the stage steps. A 60-year-old man. But what a man! The historian Zenara, writing about these times, preserved for us an amazing detail. When Emperor Decius in 251 CE decided to revive the ancient office of censor, guardian of morals with almost dictatorial powers, the Senate unanimously chose Valerian. Listen to what Emperor Decius himself said to him, as preserved in the Historia Augusta. "Fortunate Valerian, fortunate in the approval of the Senate and the Roman people. Accept the censorship of mankind and judge our morals. You will choose those worthy to remain in the Senate. You will restore the equestrian order to its ancient glory." And do you know what Valerian answered? He refused, citing the incurable corruption of the times. Think about it, a man is offered the chance to become effectively the second person in the state, and he refuses because he understands that old methods don't work in the new world. Isn't this wisdom? Or was this the first fatal mistake, the disbelief in the possibility of changing the world for the better? Valerian came from an ancient senatorial family, not one of those upstarts who bought their place in the curia with gold plundered from the provinces, but from real patricians whose ancestors sat in the Senate even under the Republic. In an era when half-literate soldiers from Pannonia and Moesia became emperors, he was a living anachronism, a man who wore the toga with such dignity as if it were still the times of Cato the Elder. We have touching testimony about his family life. He was married to Agnatia Mariniana, a woman from an equally ancient family. They had 2 sons, Gallienus and Valerian the Younger, and here begins a family drama worthy of Greek tragedy. Chapter 4: Father and Son, 2 Eras, 2 Worlds. If you want to understand how much Rome had changed by the middle of the 3rd century, just look at Valerian and his son Gallienus. It's as if a stern republican consul from the times of the Punic Wars suddenly discovered that his son had become, well, let's say, a trendy blogger. Valerian wore the traditional white toga with purple trim and believed that excessive luxury corrupts. Gallienus strutted in a Greek hamadrian decorated with golden embroidery. The father read Cato and reflected on ancient virtue. The son declaimed Greek verses and held philosophical disputes. The father rose at dawn for state affairs. The son liked to sleep in after yesterday's symposium. The Historia Augusta has preserved for us the scene of their farewell when Valerian divided the empire and departed for the east. Picture it, an elderly father in simple military armor, without unnecessary decorations, standing before his son dressed like a Greek philosopher. "Remember," says Valerian, You are a Roman, not a Greek rhetorician. The empire is not a philosophical school, but a battlefield. Gallienus remained silent. He already knew who he would become without his father's supervision. And you know what's most tragic? Perhaps Gallienus, with his Greek education and flexibility, better understood the new era than his straightforward traditionalist father. Valerian believed that personal example was more important than 1,000 orders. Therefore, when the Persian King Shapur I, we'll talk more about this Eastern Machiavelli, began devastating the eastern provinces, the old emperor didn't send legates. He personally led the legions through the deserts of Syria. At 60-something years old, with aching joints, yes, we have evidence that he suffered from gout, the disease of elderly patricians. And what was his loving son doing in Rome at this time? Gallienus wasn't wasting time. While his father marched under the scorching sun of Mesopotamia, his son arranged a cultural program for himself. Trebellius Pollio in the Historia Augusta describes with disgust these Greek entertainments, philosophical disputes until mourning, poetic competitions, theatrical performances. It got to the point that when a messenger brought the first alarming news about problems with Valerian's army in the east, Gallienus interrupted his report with the phrase, "Don't I have enough worries here in the west?" and returned to his symposium. That's what he called his drinking parties to give them a philosophical flair. Chapter 5, The March That Could Have Been Avoided. Now let's move to 259 CE, to the Roman military camp near Edessa. Scorching sun, parched earth, and 30,000 legionaries who look at their imperator with adoration bordering on religious ecstasy. Our old man, that's what the veterans called Valerian, and in this nickname there was more love than in all the official titles, Pius, Felix, Invictus. Why, just imagine the picture described by a contemporary. The imperial tent stands not in the center of the camp, sheltered from the sun, but in the blazing heat, so that the emperor would be the first to meet danger, wherever it might come from. The tent is not silk, as befits an Augustus, but made of simple goatskins, the same as any centurion's. Every morning, and we have testimony of this from several sources, the 60-year-old emperor personally walked the posts, not on horseback like force-conserving commanders, but on foot. The soldiers saw how he limped, the gout made itself known, but stubbornly walked from one century to another. And what did the divine Augustus eat? Here the Historia Augusta provides a detail that would have given any Roman aristocrat a heart attack. Valerian ate the same lentil porridge as the common legionaries. No oysters from Britain, no 20-year-old Falernian wine. Water, bread, lentils, sometimes a piece of salt pork. But here's what's remarkable. When the army captured the richest city of Antioch with its legendary palaces, the military commanders prepared quarters for the emperor in the local ruler's residence, gilded couches, Persian carpets, fountains with rose water. Do you know what Valerian did? He inspected all this magnificence and ordered, "Set up a hospital for the wounded here. I'll stay in my tent." It was then that a Persian spy, and they swarmed in the Roman camp like lice in a soldier's tunic, reported to his master Shapur, "The Roman king is a strange old man. He refuses what others kill for." Chapter 6, The Trap for a Noble Heart. The spring of 260 CE was hellish even by Mesopotamian standards, but heat wasn't the main enemy of the Romans. Plague began, that same eastern pestilence that was cutting down 100 men a day. And here Valerian performed an act that some historians call madness, while others call the highest manifestation of Roman virtue. He began personally visiting the sick. Imagine, the Emperor of Rome, the living embodiment of the state, entering hospitals reeking of death, touching the dying, distributing water from his personal supplies. The Praetorian prefect, we even have his name preserved, Successionus, begged the emperor, "Divine one, if you die, the empire dies." Valerian's answer went down in history. "If I die, you will find a new emperor. If they die, who will give Rome new Romans?" The army was melting away, first from plague, then from hunger. And then the old emperor did something that shocked even seasoned centurions. He ordered the slaughter of oxen from his personal baggage train, those same ones carrying the imperial treasury and sacred objects, and distributed the meat to the soldiers. He himself switched to bread and water. The historian Zosimus, in his New History, writes, "When the oxen were gone, the warriors began boiling the leather parts of their equipment. Old soldiers wept seeing their emperor chewing a strap from his own sandals." And here Valerian faced a fateful choice. He could have retreated, abandoned the garrisons in frontier fortresses, sacrificed several thousand for the sake of saving the main army. Any pragmatic commander would have done just that. But a Roman emperor does not abandon his soldiers. This phrase of Valerian's, preserved by Zosimus, became his death sentence. And here the main antagonist of our drama enters the scene, Shapur I, Shahanshah, King of Kings of Persia. Oh, this wasn't just an enemy, this was a genius of cunning, a master of psychological warfare. In his famous inscription at Nakshi Rustem, it has survived to our day in 3 languages. Shapur modestly styles himself worshipper of Ahura Mazda, King of Kings of Iran and non-Iran, of divine descent. Shapur proposed negotiations. He swore by all the gods, both Ahura Mazda and even Roman gods, in the safety of envoys, and Valerian believed him. Why? How could an experienced politician fall for such a primitive trick? The answer is given to us by the Christian writer Lactantius in his work on the deaths of the persecutors. Valerian could not imagine that one could swear with the intention to deceive. In his old-fashioned Roman head, it didn't fit that an oath was just words. Chapter 7: The Meeting of Two Worlds. Let's reconstruct this fateful meeting from fragments gathered from various sources. June 260 CE, valley near Edessa. Valerian goes to negotiations with minimal retinue, only prefect Successionus and several tribunes. The old emperor is dressed in a simple white toga, no armor, no weapons. In his hands, an olive branch of peace. And here's how a Persian source describes Shapur. The King of Kings sat on a golden throne, surrounded by magi and nobles. His beard was curled and anointed with perfumes. His clothes shone with purple and gold. On his head was a crown with the image of sacred fire. The contrast is striking. A simple old man in white and an Eastern despot in all the splendor of his might. Shapur met Valerian with open arms, with a smile, with honeyed speeches about peace and friendship between the two great empires. And then, Lactantius writes, when the Romans entered the tent of the Persian king, archers hidden behind carpets surrounded them. But you swore, Valerian only managed to exclaim. I swore by Persian gods about the safety of envoys, Shapur smiled. But you, Roman, came not as an envoy, but as a supplicant. Supplicants have no immunity. The trap snapped shut. For the first time in history, a Roman emperor was in captivity. Chapter 8: The divine Augustus becomes a slave. What happened next, even enemies of Rome describe with horror, but let's separate facts from propaganda. Let's start with the most shocking. Lactantius, this Christian author of the 4th century, left us a blood-chilling description. Shapur, the king of the Persians, who captured him, whenever he wanted to get into a carriage or mount a horse, commanded the Roman to bend down and offer his back, and placing his foot on the captive's spine, said with a sneer and reproach that this was real, and not what the Romans painted on boards and walls. Think about this contrast. A man before whom just yesterday a third of the known world bowed becomes a living footstool. The emperor's purple toga drags in the dust, hands that signed edicts for millions brace against the dirt. But was Lactantius objective? Here's what's important to understand. Lactantius wrote his book with a very specific purpose, to show how horribly all persecutors of Christians end up. And Valerian had organized one of the cruelest persecutions, so the Christian author was interested in painting his torments in the blackest colors. What do other sources say? Let's turn to Persian testimonies. At Nakshi Rustem, you can still see grand rock reliefs glorifying Shapur's victories. One of them depicts a kneeling Roman before the Persian king. But attention! This Roman is dressed in imperial regalia, unbound, and his pose, though humiliated, is not slavish. Modern historians, for example, Professor Turan Dari, believe, yes, Valerian was used in humiliating ceremonies, but these were more like theatrical performances for Persian nobility rather than daily abuse. Shapur was too clever to torture to death such a valuable trophy. But psychological torture, judging by everything, was sophisticated. The Roman historian Aurelius Victor mentions, Valerian was forced to attend banquets where Persian nobility drank wine from melted Roman eagles, the sacred standards of legions. Imagine the feelings of the old soldier, seeing symbols of Roman glory turned into dishes for barbarian drinking parties. But the worst thing, Shapur regularly read letters from Rome to Valerian, and in one of them, oh, this was a blow worse than death. In one of them, it was reported that Gallienus, learning of his father's captivity, uttered a phrase that shocked even the cynical Roman Senate. Didn't I know that my father was mortal? Such was all the grief of a loving son. No attempts to ransom his father, no embassies, no prisoner exchanges. The Historia Augusta adds a horrible detail. Gallienus not only didn't try to free his father, he celebrated his sole rule. Chapter 9: The Final Act of Tragedy. How long did Valerian live in captivity? Sources differ, from several months to 6 years. Most likely about 3 to 4 years. How did he die? And here begins a real detective story. Version 1 from the same Lactantius. Shapur poured molten gold down Valerian's throat. Supposedly, you loved Roman gold, so take your fill. Beautiful, symbolic, but too much like literary fiction. Version 2, more prosaic. The old heart couldn't take it. The man was nearly 70. He had endured incredible stress. Living conditions were far from comfortable. This version seems most plausible. But what happened after death? Here all sources agree on the main point, though they differ in details. Valerian's body was flayed. Lactantius vividly describes. After he ended his life in such shameful slavery, his skin was stripped and cleaned of flesh, then dyed purple and placed in the temple of barbarian gods as a monument to Roman shame. Notice the detail. The skin was dyed purple, the imperial color. Even in posthumous humiliation, Shapur observed a perverted protocol. Was this true? There's no archaeological evidence, but the Persian tradition did indeed have the custom of making stuffed trophies from defeated enemies. And several independent sources mention that Roman ambassadors coming to the Persian court in subsequent decades were first shown this horrible emperor effigy. Supposedly, here's your Roman arrogance, remember this. According to some accounts, Valerian's skin hung in the temple of Ahura Mazda until the Arab conquest of Persia, almost 4 centuries. Chapter 10, The Legacy of Defeat. Valerian's captivity became a tectonic shift in Roman consciousness. For the first time it became clear, Rome is not invincible. The emperor is not a god. Old virtues don't guarantee victory. How did the empire react? First with shock and denial. The Senate for some time pretended that nothing had happened. In official documents of 261 CE, we find an amazing formulation. In the consulship of Emperor Valerian, which Valerian, if the emperor is in captivity, historians believe this was Gallienus's brother, hastily appointed consul to avoid speaking the terrible truth. But the main thing, after Valerian, no Roman emperor ever again personally led an army to the east. The lesson was learned. Eastern cunning is stronger than Roman valor. And what about the old Roman virtues that Valerian embodied? They didn't disappear overnight, but the historian Ammianus Marcellinus, writing a century later, bitterly notes, after Valerian, honor became stupidity, loyalty became naivety, courage became recklessness. The empire learned to survive, but forgot how to be great. Chapter 11, The Final Judgment. Thus ended the story of Publius Licinius Valerian, the emperor who became a footstool, a man born in the wrong era, or perhaps the last one born in the right one. Was Valerian simply a naive old man who didn't understand that the world had changed? Or was he the last true Roman in an era when Rome ceased to be Rome? History is often unfair. It remembers Valerian's humiliation, but forgets that this man at 60 voluntarily shouldered a crumbling empire. It forgets that he shared the last piece of bread with his soldiers. It forgets that he chose captivity over betrayal, for he could have retreated, abandoning the garrisons, but didn't do it. Perhaps the real tragedy isn't that Valerian lost, but that the world had changed so much that honor became weakness, nobility became stupidity, and keeping one's word became a death sentence. When Persian priests in the temple of Ahura Mazda showed ambassadors the straw-stuffed skin of the Roman emperor, they thought they were demonstrating the triumph of East over West. But in reality, this was an effigy not just of a man. This was an effigy of an entire era when one's word meant more than gold, and honor more than life. And you know what's most bitter in this whole story? A millennium and a half later, we live in a world that's more like Shapur's world than Valerian's. In a world where the naivety of the last Roman knight evokes a condescending smile, while the cunning of the Persian king gets an understanding nod. But perhaps that's exactly why Valerian's story is so important. Perhaps in an era of pragmatism and cynicism, we especially need to remember a man who chose to die as a Roman rather than live by betraying himself. But that's philosophy, and we still have one unanswered question. Remember, I promised to tell you about Gallienus's shocking phrase. Well, according to the testimony of the Historia Augusta, upon learning of his father's captivity, this refined aesthete didn't just say, "I knew my father was mortal." He added, "Now I can rule as I see fit in the Greek way, not the Roman way." Old Valerian in Persian captivity never learned of this, and this, perhaps, was the only mercy that fate showed him.